The ghost mirror. It was an old, ornate mirror, framed in dark oak and polished to a deep shine. When Mara found it at the flea market, tucked behind some broken furniture and tarnished silverware, she had no idea how much it would change her life. The mirror was beautiful, but it had an air of something more, something unsettling. The vendor, a grizzled old man with a weathered face, had warned her, but she hadn't taken him seriously. "It's a cursed thing, that mirror," he muttered, his voice low and gravelly. "Been in my family for generations. Bad luck follows it around. You take it, you keep it, but it'll never leave you." Mara laughed it off. She had always been fascinated by antiques, and the mirror's intricate design was too perfect to pass up. It wasn't until later that night, after it had been placed in her living room, that the first strange occurrence took place. At first, it was subtle. She'd catch glimpses of movement in the reflection out of the corner of her eye, shadows that didn't match the light. Her own image would shift, but only for a second. Nothing too alarming. But the more she looked, the more she started to feel like something was wrong. The reflection didn't feel like her. There was always something off. One evening, while she was tidying up the room, the mirror caught her attention. She stopped, staring at her own reflection. Her features, her posture, they seemed too perfect. A sickening thought crept into her mind. What if this wasn't just a reflection? What if something else was looking back at her? She shook her head, trying to laugh off the thought. "It's just a mirror," she muttered, but she couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching her. The next few days brought more unsettling moments. The house was silent, but she began hearing faint whispers, like a voice barely audible, from the direction of the mirror. It was always when she was alone, always just out of reach. She'd rush to it, hoping to catch whatever it was, but every time, the mirror reflected only her empty room. Then one night, after returning home from work, she noticed the reflection was different. The light outside had dimmed, casting long shadows across the walls, but the mirror wasn't reflecting the room she knew. Instead, it showed an empty version of her living room. The furniture was arranged differently, the colors faded, the air thick with a strange mist, and in the corner, standing in the dimmest part of the room, was a figure. It wasn't clear at first, but as she stared, her breath caught in her throat. The figure was her, or at least, it looked like her, but the figure in the mirror wasn't alive. It stood unnaturally still, its face pale, its eyes hollow and black, void of expression. Its lips twitched, a small, cruel smile pulling at the corners of its mouth. Mara backed away slowly, heart pounding. The reflection stayed frozen, but she could see its movements, a subtle shift in the way its head tilted toward her. "Get out," the voice whispered. Asterisk her asterisk voice, but it was deep, distorted, guttural. Panic gripped her chest. She reached for the mirror, her hand trembling. The cold surface beneath her fingers felt wrong, as if it were alive, as if it had a pulse. The moment she touched it, a jolt ran through her, and for an instant, she saw the world through the mirror's eyes. The room was dark, suffocating, and filled with an oppressive silence. She could feel something pressing in on her from every side. She tried to pull away, but her fingers were stuck, as if the mirror were holding her in place. Then she saw it, the reflection of herself, but it wasn't the woman she knew. Her reflection grinned, a wide, eerie smile that stretched impossibly far, her eyes glinting with something primal, something hungry. "You're mine now," it hissed, the voice dripping with malice. Mara screamed and yanked her hand back, stumbling away from the mirror. But as she did, something caught her eye. Another reflection, faint and nearly invisible, lingering just beyond the glass. It was her, but her movements didn't match hers. The other Mara was standing still, her eyes wide and unblinking, watching her every move, mimicking her actions, but with a lag, like a distorted echo of her own existence. Days passed, and Mara's fear grew. Every night, she felt the mirror calling to her. Every time she walked by it, The reflection would follow her, eyes always watching, lips always twitching into that same sinister grin. She couldn't leave it behind. It was like a curse, a magnetic force pulling her closer. And then one evening, when she stood before it again, something new happened. Her reflection no longer mimicked her movements. It acted first. The smile on her mirrored self's face grew wide, too wide, and it whispered, louder than ever, "I'm taking your place." Mara stumbled back, a cold sweat coating her skin. She reached for the mirror, trying to pull it away from the wall, but it wouldn't budge. It was as if it had become part of the house, part of her life, its presence suffocating her. Her reflection smirked, lifting a hand as if to beckon her in. Without thinking, she reached out. The world spun. For a moment, there was only the sound of her heart beating in her ears. Then, silence. When Mara woke, she was in her living room, but something was wrong. The air was heavier, the room darker. The light from the window had turned to a sickly, pale yellow, casting shadows that seemed to stretch and twist unnaturally. She glanced at the mirror, and her breath caught in her throat. There was no longer a reflection of her standing in the room. Only the figure in the corner, the figure that had once been her own, was staring back at her, its hollow eyes gleaming with victory. The reflection grinned, its lips curving into an impossibly wide smile. And then, in the cold silence of the room, the voice echoed again. "Now you're mine.